Hello, Big Reds. This is Mr. Fishel. I haven't talked to you in a while, so make sure you listen carefully. Follow along in this sheet, the right triangle congruent sheet. Okay, just a quick recap. Remember, there are several ways to prove triangles are congruent, and we're going to be focusing on those. So remember, we have side, 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 angle, side, angle, side, angle, 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 side, and hypotenuse, leg. That should have been in your notes. You should have that, but just in case if you do not, here are some samples. Okay, here's an example of side, side, side. Here's an example of side, angle, side. Side, angle, side. Side, angle, side. Here's an example of angle, side, angle. Angles between the two sides. Or I'm sorry, the side is between the two angles. Angle, angle, side. And hypotenuse, leg. And hypotenuse, leg only works with right triangles. So you see, you have to be right triangles. Biggest mistake students make, again, is if it's hypotenuse, leg, or I'm sorry, if it's a right triangle, students think it's automatically hypotenuse, leg. It's not always that way. And these are some congruent statements. The order of the congruent statement makes a difference. Remember, if I have angle H, angle L, okay? If you look, H and L are both congruent. They have to be in the same position. Here, P and M are in the same position. R and N are in the same position, okay? It's all based on the triangle congruence parts. So, that being said, let's go back to our sheet. So I want you to do this with me. Now we're going to go through it. So first of all, state if the two triangles are congruent. If so, state how you know. So if I'm looking at this one, this is a right angle, this is a right angle. And the side is congruent to itself because they share a side. Now again, this is one of those samples. This is not hypotenuse, leg, because you could see the right angles points to the hypotenuse. So it can't be hypotenuse, leg, because the hypotenuses are not congruent. So if you look at just one of these at a time, this is what I like to tell students to do. Look at one at a time. I have an angle between two sides. This must be side, angle, side. Going over here. If you have my right angles, they point to the hypotenuse. And guess what? In this case, the hypotenuses are congruent. And a leg's congruent. So these are congruent by hypotenuse, leg. Okay. I look at number 3. Again, right angle points to the hypotenuse. Now this one, the hypotenuses are congruent, but there's no other legs that are congruent. No other sides. Remember, for hypotenuse, leg over here, we had two sides that were congruent to each other. Here, we only have one set of sides. So we do have angle, angle, side. Notice that the side is not between the two angles, so it's angle, angle, side, how they're congruent. Let's look at number 4. 4, these are vertical angles, so that makes this a right angle as well. These are both right angles. Again, points to the hypotenuse. The hypotenuses are congruent, but there's no legs congruent, no other side. I do see two angles and a side. The side is not between the two angles, so they're congruent by angle, angle, side. Looking at number 5. Number 5, you can see they have the side between them that's congruent. But again, that is the hypotenuse, but there's no other side that's congruent. So again, we have two angles and the side not between the angles, so it's angle, angle, side. 3 in a row. Angle, angle, side. Number 6. Oh boy, we have these angles are congruent because they are vertical angles, remember. All right. are vertical angles, but now we have 3 angles congruent to 3 angles. Angle, angle, angle is not a way to prove triangles are congruent. So these are not congruent. Look at number 7. 7. Looking by this, this one's not a right triangle at all. I don't know why it's on here. Oh well. So we have an angle, 2 sides around it, so it looks like side, angle, side, right? But if you look at this one, the angle's not between the 2 sides. The angle's up here, 2 sides are down here. This is angle, side, side. That's a bad word. You don't want to use that. So that means they are not congruent. Next, number 8. Number 8, we do have right triangles again. Right angles point to hypotenuses, but those are not congruent. Do have the side in the middle that's congruent that they both share. So if you look at each triangle, it's side, angle, side. Number 9. Again, vertical angles in the middle. Vertical angles, but we have 3 angles, no sides. Angle, angle, angle is not a way to prove triangles are congruent, so they are not congruent. Number 10, vertical angles. That means that these two are both right angles. They point to the hypotenuse. Hypotenuses are not congruent, so it cannot be HL. We do have a side, angle, side. Angles between the 2 sides. That's the way to prove they're congruent. All right, flip over the page. Now it says a bunch of stuff. I crossed out some of these directions, so I want to tell you what my directions for you are. This is what we're going to do. State what additional information is required in order to know that triangles are congruent for the reason given. Then I want to write that they're congruent by hypotenuse leg. Let's work on that. So if I look here, and I want to write a congruent statement as well. So if I look at number 11 is hypotenuse leg. Well, I could choose either one. I choose this side is congruent to this side. Now I have the hypotenuse and the leg. Hypotenuse and the leg, so these are congruent to each other. So I write triangle congruent statement. DFE is congruent to triangle VXW. Now we always check it when you're done. If you look at D and V, they're both right angles. If I look at FE, that has 3 marks. XW has 3 marks. You can see those work out. DF has 1 mark. VX has 1 mark. So those work out. This would be a great congruent statement. Okay. And remember, you could write congruent statements differently as long as the D and the V would be in the same spot. The F and the X would be in the same spot. And the E and the W would be in the same spot. Okay. All right, let's look at number 12. Number 12. To be hypotenuse leg, these hypotenuses would have to be congruent, and these legs would be congruent. So we're going to write congruent statement. Triangle ABC is congruent to triangle VWX. Again, AB has 1 mark, VW has 1 mark, BC has 2 marks, WX has 2 marks, and V and A both have the same right angle. See what I'm doing? Every time you write a congruent statement, if you want to get this correct, make sure you check to make sure the corresponding parts are congruent. Let's look at number 13. 13, these are both right angles. Share a side in the middle. But in order to be HL, hypotenuses must be congruent. So triangle congruent statement for this one would be triangle HMK is congruent to triangle LMK. M's work out. HK, our first and last over here, KL are first and last over here. They both have congruent marks there. Let's look at number 14. All right, we would need to be HL. Hypotenuse would have to be congruent, and a leg would have to be congruent. These could actually be congruent different ways as well, but we're working on an HL. So for a congruent statement, you could write LMN is congruent to triangle. You see L is a right angle, so we go up here to the right angle, which has to be B. M is a congruent angle to C, so C must be next, and then D is after that. About 50% of your Unit 3 test is going to be over proven triangles congruent, so this is a good practice. All right, number 15. They have right angles. Hypotenuses must be congruent to be HL. So we could write a triangle congruent statement. Triangle IDJ is congruent to triangle CDB. I and D have marks, C and D have marks. All right. Okay. Oops. 3 more to go. All right, number 16. Vertical angles here. They're right angles, so hypotenuses are congruent. The leg is congruent. So we have triangle VCU. That's congruent to triangle ECD. If I check that over, C's are congruent, the U and the D are congruent, and CU is congruent to CD. Those are congruent right here. Okay. Next, I have 2 right triangles again, and hypotenuses must be congruent to be HL, hypotenuse and the leg. So I could write a triangle congruent statement. CDE is congruent to triangle HIJ. Let's check that over. C and H are both right angles. CD has 1 mark, HI has 1 mark. DE has 2 marks, IJ has 2 marks. That works. And last but not least, angle E. It's congruent. Those are vertical angles. Those are congruent to each other. So I just have 2 angles over here, 2 angles over here. That's not a way to prove triangles are congruent, so they're not congruent. Okay. All right, so for the formative assessment, okay, you're going to do 2 things. Number 1, turn in the sheet to Mr. Fishel. Number 2, on lined paper, write a paragraph in complete sentences explaining how you can prove triangles congruent and write congruent statements. Oh, sorry. Whoa. This is what your formative assessment is going to be. All right. Thanks for listening, and go Big Reds.